Go, Matt.
Okay. Hey, everyone. If you're watching our LDUH, Elder, Lud, whatever you like to call it, hangout tonight, for those of us here, we are talking about this book, Strong Female Protagonist, by Brennan Lee Mulligan and illustrated by Molly Ostertag. I'm sure Molly also had some story input as well, no doubt. This was a short read pick, I believe. Is that correct? Like it was, yeah. So
Mini read.
We all decided, mini read, thank you. We decided we wanted to read this one because a few of us had heard about it. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I guess I'll start some general thoughts.
Go for it.
So I had heard of this prior, mainly through going through Comixology, actually, and buying things, and occasionally this would come up in recommended stuff. I remember when I was buying copies of Lumberjane's stuff, it would appear there. I think I might have also had it turn up as like a other people also bought or read type thing when I was getting Paper Girls. So I don't know, but so I was aware of it, but I didn't really know a lot about it. Knew Molly from some other stuff, but so I was kind of like, that sounds like kind of my thing. So I quite liked it. I think I gave it 4 out of 5, so I didn't like love it, but I still really enjoyed it. The art style doesn't really do it for me. It's not my kind of usual thing as far as comics or graphic novels go. But the story and characters and stuff, and particularly, like, my favorite thing was probably the little creator notes down the bottom of every page. They were really, really good. Yeah. Did you not have them in the digital one?
I'm checking.
They were in the digital one, at least the one that
I had. Because I did Comixology and it does the frame by frame thing. They didn't show up, and I didn't ever expand out.
Right.
So. You need to go through and read them all, Mel.
There's some really good stuff.
Now I have to reread it.
I said one of them out loud to Kirsten the other night. I was like, oh, she says, what are you laughing at? And I can't remember which one it was. I'll see if I can find it later. But
it was the one about the guy.
Oh, that's right.
And she was trying to talk to him about books, and he shot her down, and the commentary was like something like, totally "Hey, nerd boy," or something. Yeah.
This is definitely not a self-referential thing for the author at all. So yeah, no, I really liked it. I think I will probably go through and read the second volume or second collected volume, I guess, because I think the volumes are actually numbered slightly differently. This is kind of called book 1, which is I think 4 of the first 3 or 4 volumes collected. So but yeah, I really liked it. I liked the idea and the concept, and some really cool moments in there, and some nice interesting themes that were being dealt with. So that was all good. So yeah, really liked it. Looking forward to reading the rest of the story, or at least as much of it that's out. I don't know if it's actually finished its run on the web at all.
It's finished, yeah.
It has? Cool. Yeah. So I can read the whole thing. And
it was never traditionally published. It was done as a Kickstarter. So I think that's why it's got, like, it doesn't have the normal issues of circumstances.
Yeah,
and
cool.
Stuff like that.
Awesome. So there you go. So yes, yay.
Yeah, Kirsten.
I quite liked it as well. I think I did enjoy the art style, but I'm with Matt. I really liked the little quips down the bottom. I really enjoyed that. That was something I hadn't really seen in a comic before.
I'm cranky now that I missed that.
And I quite liked the different take on it, on the superhero, because I don't really read superhero comics. Most, not because I don't like them, because I've enjoyed like the Marvel movies and stuff. But I think it's more just by the time I kind of was interested in them, there was just so many that I was like, what's the point of even trying to read any of it? But I did think that this was a really interesting take on it. I kind of liked the whole idea that it all sort of happened at the same time. Like all these people started getting powers at the same time. and I liked the way that they sort of showed the grey areas between, rather than just being good guys and bad guys. So I quite enjoyed that, yeah. And I'll probably get onto the online one and read some of the rest of it on the online one, because yeah, I had trouble getting it from the library. They had to send it from Sydney. They're probably going to want it back. They did send me a thing saying they wanted it back, but I think
I can't return it.
They don't actually want it back right now because all the libraries are closed. But yeah, I will probably continue with it.
Awesome. Elizabeth?
I was a bit ambivalent about it. I think first start, I kind of decided late to join tonight's hangout, and the story itself wasn't at all what I was expecting at all. It was darker and less explicitly feminist, I would say, than I was expecting from the title. I did enjoy the art style, and I think it does a good job of getting you to think about some issues. But at the same time, I also felt that it wasn't anything that hadn't been done before. Like, it definitely has, like, superheroes not being great people is not a new sort of take. And although I haven't read the comic of Umbrella Academy, and I haven't finished watching the series, I've seen enough of it to get like a similar sort of vibe in some respects, at any rate. So yeah, I guess I was glad to read it, but I'm not sure that I liked it enough to continue with it.
Kim?
I quite enjoyed it. I think what I enjoyed the most about it is that it's very story heavy, not so focused on the art. I did just notice that the second one is all in colour, whereas the first one is all black and white. So I think I'd probably like the art a little more in the second one, which I haven't started yet. I think the part I really liked the most about it is that it was focusing on the challenges of someone who was like quite young when this all happened, and how they deal with that psychologically, and how other people react to them, which that's not something I've read specifically myself before. Whereas you do get the, superheroes aren't the best people. I've never seen one from like a teenager's point of view. So that I really enjoyed. I think that was my favorite part of the story, and the part that I really liked the most. Yeah, it wasn't, I wouldn't say I'd give it a 5-star, probably about 3.5 stars to 4 stars. But that's, the specific part I liked the best was them delving into that part of the story, which I hadn't read before myself.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the middle ground on this one. I thought I probably will continue on just purely because it's only one more book, and I know that that's the end of the story, and I'm enough of a completionist that I enjoyed it enough that I'll probably willing to do that, but only if I can get it from the library.
I think I'm very lucky that I got both of them from the library.
Yeah, if I'd borrowed them before all of this had happened, it would have been fine, but I was like, no, don't, I'll hold off, and blah, stupid. Anyway, no, I'm actually very much in Elizabeth's camp on this one, in that I felt like it was very much something I've read quite a few times. It's basically The Incredibles. And I think if I'd read it when it came out, because it came out in 2014, sorry. If I'd read it when it came out, I would have been obsessed with it and thought it was just amazing and innovative and everything. But having read quite a few books since then that are based on this sort of concept, and I have read some that were like teenagers as well, I'm sort of like, okay, well, this is a lot darker, but it is basically dealing with the same sorts of themes that I've read a few times now. The whole thing, anyway, we're going to go there in the discussion, stop that. Essentially, if it was a series, I wouldn't continue, but because it's one more book, I probably will, because I would like to see what she does with it in the end, given the scope of what she's trying to achieve for her end game. So, yeah. All right, now let's talk about her best friend, Feral. Holy shit.
Feral is messed up. It's definitely messed up.
Oh
Very
my
messed up.
God. That was, I thought everything was dark, but that was dark.
That was pretty dark.
That was like Neil Gaiman level. What the hell? What did anybody think about the morality of that situation?
Yeah. Oh, that part kind of disturbed me. But it, I don't know. I guess I kind of felt like she was not in a mental state to be able to make that kind of decision, and people were taking that advantage of her in that, like, and that frustrated me that everybody was just letting her do that. And
even if it was, like, let's say she was more, you know, of sound mind earlier on and made that decision, but then later on, it's like, at what point have you done this enough that you've made up for whatever wrongs you've done? Like, at what point does the scale tip over into like, now you're into some seriously fucked up shit, because, you know, you've done your due, and now you're putting yourself through this for perhaps no good reason. And the whole thing of like, where do you know, they don't tell you where these organs and stuff are going. They give you some pictures of people with, you know, like little X-ray type shots of the people with organs in them, like that she's saved with her donations, but you don't know that it's just those people. Is it like, are there more going elsewhere to people who maybe shouldn't have them, and like, well, they're jumping on a list, you know, all that kind of.
I agree. I think if it had been happening somewhere with better governing system that for donations, where I would be more like, I'd be more confident that they were actually doing this in a way that was based on needs rather than who's got money.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that she's basically living in eternal pain in a room. It's just all kinds of fucked up.
Yeah.
I felt that way at first, but I did kind of come around to it a bit in some respects. Like, I think she makes there is a good point made that what's the protagonist's name? I've forgotten.
Alison,
yeah. Alison looking for the one-shot perfect solution, like that's not like ever going to happen. Yeah, it's not reasonable. And I think that's what a lot of people do. Whereas at least Farrell, she's doing what she can with what she has. And I think that's where real change is made.
I agree with that, and I agree that it's about everybody making an effort to make a change, and it's all about all of us lifting together rather than a few people doing the heavy lifting. And I agree with all of that. I just don't know if I agree with her methodology, but then I suppose the whole point is that it was her call.
Yeah. It just seems very extreme that she puts herself through it continuously. Like, once she's better, she's straight back in. She's better again. She's regrowing those organs, she's straight back in again.
It's true, that's not very balanced.
It seems more like she's, punishing herself rather than doing something.
Yeah, exactly.
Because she wants to. She feels like she's atoning for something and punishing herself because of it.
They should be treating it more like I feel like if they treated it more like a job, like, it's awful and horrible, but at least if it was treated like a job, like you've got days off, so that you can go and enjoy your life a little bit, like a more balanced approach to it, I feel like it would have been more palatable to us. But under the circumstances where it really just felt like they were the people there were taking advantage of her, even though she was voluntarily there.
Like, I mean, you could, like, I know there's arguments about like your bodily autonomy and stuff, but like, you could say, well, I just want you to kill me and give all my organs to someone, and they're not going to do that because they're going to think that you're not really mentally sound of mind, or I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't know. It's one of those, I suppose it was one of those grey areas of like, yes, you should have a say over what happens with your body, but like there's a point where it's like, you know, you can't go back from that. And like she sort of, the way it sounded to me, and I could be wrong about how I interpret it, was that she would be in this state for pretty much ever. It's not like she could at some point go, okay, I'm done, I've had enough of this and I'm not doing it anymore. Like, how does she get out of that now? Like, I don't know. I feel like for her to have the choice, she needs to be able to pull out when she wants to. And I don't know whether she really has that option.
At the very least, it should be periodical contracts or something on those lines. Yes, I'm signing up for 6 months of this as long as I'm still of sound mind and that sort of thing. And and then it gets, you know, reviewed before continuing on or something on those lines.
There should be some kind of psychological oversight.
And that's what I think really didn't happen. I don't think there was anybody checking in to make sure she was actually making a sound decision. So.
No,
but I feel like there's a catch-22 there, because if you are of sound mind and you say this is what I'm going to do, everyone's going to look at you and say that is not a decision that a person of sound mind would make.
Yeah, but I feel like there's people who would make the same argument for euthanasia, and I'm like, I kind of think euthanasia is actually okay as long as someone has good cause and is of their own mind, like they're not under any pressure from someone else. Like, I don't know, not that this is euthanasia, but it's getting into those realms of questionability. I don't know. I think the problem is that I think that's the reason this sticks out from this particular story. Like, there's a lot of nutty moral questions that they talk about throughout it, but this one sticks out because I just don't think there is any, like, in most of them, I felt like you sort of kind of knew what was the right answer, or what got, like, the right direction, even if it wasn't the exact answer. But this one, it was just like such a moral quandary.
Yeah. And I think I had a reaction to it, kind of like, I was so horrified by the concept that I think that's probably colored, you know, the morality of it as well, because I just find it so horrible. But I mean, if I was someone who was waiting on the organ donor list, or I knew someone who I loved that was, would I find it as horrible or not, you know?
Well, see, as someone who had, my uncle had his kidneys done pretty much about the year when I was born. And he lived for, wait, was it the year I was born? I don't know. He had them for over 20 years anyway, which was quite a long period of time. Like most don't last that long for a donation. And he part of the reason why he died was because his kidneys were failing. The other part was that he was riddled with cancer from being on immune suppressants for so very long. But the thing is that he had a much better quality of life for that period of time in the end.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen that, my cousin had to have a kidney and pancreas transplant, but also, like, he was on the donor list for a really, really long time, and they kept passing him over because every time he was, like, come to the top of the list, it was like, sorry, I'm still taking drugs, so they wouldn't give him any. And it's like, well, they've got a good reason to not give you your friggin' kidneys, man. But, like, also part of the reason he was taking drugs was because he was messed up from having all this pain through all his life. So, you know, it was just we had this whole issue with my family where my uncle was basically, my uncle had said he would be a organ donor when he dies. And then his wife, he's still alive, but his wife said in front of my cousin, while my cousin was still on the waiting list for a donor, said, oh, well, I don't care if you die before me, I'm not letting them take your organs. And so in front of my cousin, and he was like really pissed off.
I'm not surprised.
So I have seen kind of some of this firsthand. I don't know, maybe it's my own personal, like, feelings about, like, things with torture and stuff. I find it really, really horrible, that whole concept of her. And I feel like she might think she can deal with it, but then when it actually happens, maybe she won't be able to, but then can she back out once that happens?
There's a lot of questioning behind all of that, because like as much as I didn't feel like necessarily I got the feeling like it wouldn't have been easy to get back out, but that was mostly based on the receptionist, I feel like. Whereas based on what we did see of the medical staff when she was in the room about to be operated on before the fire guy came in, they were trying to be nice with her. They were trying to find, like, I don't know how hard they worked to find a solution for the anesthesia, whatever, for her.
I got the impression she just lied about that and said there was going to be some, but there wasn't really.
Yeah, she'd lied about it. But what I mean is that they weren't able to give her any, but how hard had they tried to find a solution for that was what I meaning. And because they were all like, you know, we've got these videos for you to watch, which was the people saying thank you for her donations that she'd saved. So that's really nice, and it seemed really good. But I must admit that the receptionist and the situation that was happening there around the protesters made me feel like that maybe the hospital wasn't as nice as it seemed.
Yeah, that was what was worrying me. I was like, this just feels like really dodgy. And
anyway, we're picking it apart probably far further than we're supposed to.
Probably. But I mean, I suppose that's like testament to how much of an impact that storyline had, because I think there was definitely the thread of the story that had the most impact on me as I was reading. I think I was more interested in her as a character than as the main character.
Yeah, the main character just felt like a vehicle for the questions. But I mean, that's always the case, isn't it? Shall we go on to something else then?
Mel, can I read you the little bit down the bottom of the thing that I was talking about before?
Yes, please, because I was trying to find it, but the page, the little previews of the pages are so tiny, I couldn't find the right one.
So she comes into the cafeteria, and the guy, I don't know, is it meant to be pint-sized, that guy, or is it someone else?
I think it's just a random guy.
Just some random guy, yeah. And he's reading a copy of The Lord of the Rings, Two Towers specifically. And she comes out and she goes, oh, hey, you're reading that book. And he's like, what? She's like, you know, is this the first time reading? He's like, no, I just like it. And she's like, no, that's cool. I like them too. And she's like, I read them in, grade school. And he's like, oh, I think you're probably thinking of The Hobbit. She's like, no. And he's like, there's no way, you read these in grade school, and like blah, blah, blah. And then the note down the bottom is, hey, nerd boy, I know you think you're somehow being made fun of, but that girl is genuinely reaching out to you. You know about friends, right? Instead of condescending to her in a preemptive shielding of your bruised and battered ego, maybe just talk to her about the book you both like. Do this now before it's too late and you're writing a comic to deal with all these feelings years later.
Oh,
and I'm like,
yes,
okay.
Exactly what all of us were thinking when reading it, though. I betcha.
Oh yeah, because it was making me like, it was scratching me in the wrong place, because I was like, oh. And especially because like I know I wouldn't have been able to read Lord of the Rings when I was in primary school, but I teach in primary school, and I guarantee there's quite a lot of kids that do actually read it. So it's not like it's something that's that unusual for someone in primary school to read Lord of the Rings.
No, I mean, look, my nephew's reading at a pretty high level, and I considered giving it to him because I find it hard to buy a lot of the modern books that are adult reads for him, because they often have a lot of content that is not.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to give him in year 7.
Yeah.
But he's up to adult readers, so it's just making my life that much harder. Oh, I can put it on. I can't.
I did have a quick look at the author's Twitter feed, and apparently he plays in an online D&D campaign that's streamed online. So,
so he's definitely a nerd boy.
Definitely a nerd boy, yeah.
So he has inserted himself into this story, even for a quick cameo.
I mean, you're going to have to be a nerd boy if you're writing about superheroes to some extent. So
yep.
Oh, you're talking about that scene where they're at, like, it's at the club, and it's like, yeah.
I was just saying that the author, I had a look at his Twitter feed, and he plays in an online D&D campaign that's streamed. So he has his nerd creds.
So I was thinking about what you said, Elizabeth, about the fact that it was less feminist than you thought it would be, which, by the way, I agree with. Did you have the same? I thought this was written by Molly. That's why.
Yeah. I was I went into it with that sort of expectation that it was something that it would be, she'd have had more involvement instead of just having done the art. I guess I do feel that, because I mean, the title is very loaded. And I do feel that the author is actually doing a little bit with it. But it is really low key in that sense, and so much not quite what I was expecting.
Yeah,
but I do feel he is still doing something there.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he was anti-feminist in any way. In fact, there's quite obvious points where he's very clearly making statements around those sorts of things. But they, like you said, they're low key. They're not really the major point. And I feel like the name sort of leads you to think that it's going to be something along those lines. But when you get in there, you realize, oh, actually, you're meaning strong.
Literally.
Yes.
Literally strong.
I've kind of thought that was the point. Was to play off that.
I suppose, yes. But that just like that, I agree. Like in that, I was disappointed by that. Like I was fine with the story, but I feel like if I had known better what I was going in for, I wouldn't have been slightly disappointed by it, and I probably would have ended up giving it a higher start. Like I do feel like that's one of the problems I had with it, was that I was just sort of kept waiting for it to be a little bit more in that area, and it wasn't. It was very muchly the comic, the undermining of the comic hero's journey side of things.
But also the undermining of the typical character that is called strong female protagonist as well. Like she doesn't have her shit together in any way. So I think he's undermining it a bit there, like as compared to kind of like your more typical like urban fantasy paranormal romance character who is both strong and, while maybe on the back foot for the story, still kind of has things reasonably together.
Yeah. I don't. I think my point for me, it was that I feel like it wouldn't have been this story if it had been written by a female.
So in that realm, what do you think it would be then?
Well, I did not know. Like I wasn't. Not like I knew what the storyline was. I deliberately didn't read to find out what the storyline was, but I was expecting something that was more of a feminist narrative.
So please help me understand what that means. What would be a more feminist narrative? Because I didn't feel it wasn't feminist. But what would?
I don't. I agree with you there. It definitely treats her as an equal human being. She is not in any way secondary to males or anything along those lines. But it's not the narrative that he's telling, if that makes sense. It's not the focal point of the story.
Okay, so I'm right. Got you. That's So it's not a feminist. It's not a story about feminism. Is what you're trying. Thank you. Okay, cool. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm with you now.
Yes.
Were you expect? I guess I was maybe. And this probably won't make sense to any of you except for Mel. I was expecting something more along the lines of Tansy Rayner Roberts' cookie cutter superhero stories, which are great, by the way. Highly recommend. Australian version of superheroes. It's great.
So good.
I feel like that was kind of more what I was expecting. So while it does kind of tackle some thoughtful issues, it's generally done in a bit more light-hearted fashion. And
I didn't even know it was superheroes, so I wasn't even expecting it to be like that.
No, me either.
I had absolutely no idea what this was coming into it. So
did you know it was superheroes, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'd read the blurb, so I was expecting superheroes.
Yeah, same.
See, I just looked at the cover and hadn't really.
If you look at the back cover, it's very obvious.
Which I didn't.
I've got a digital version. I didn't see that. So
I think I was actually more thinking that she would be a writer and would be about her writing a character. But I think, show me the cover again.
Yeah, because it's got all her books and things.
Yeah, it's got like
But
books
that's just
and
like
stuff
her school
and pages,
stuff.
and
But
I thought,
again, you don't know it from.
And from that, I was like really expecting a feminist story of some girl at uni or something along those lines. The placement of where she was accurate, but it wasn't what the story was about.
And I feel
actually,
like the kind of activities that she was doing was also like she was going to protests and and that sort of thing.
It was very much like the front cover very much represented who she was and what she was doing with her life, but it wasn't really about the focal point of the story, I don't feel like. But anyway, I actually related it to Sarah Kuhn's heroine complex. No, that's not the one I was thinking of. Not heroine complex. Now it's going to kill me.
Another story that it reminded me of was Accelerants by Lena Wilson, which was a novella published by the Book Smugglers, which was more of a queer intersectional feminism sort of take on superheroes, which was excellent. But and I think that kind of taps into my expectations that I had for this, because since Molly Ostertag was part of the creative team, I was expecting something a bit more queer as well.
I was kind of surprised at that point when Farrell came onto it. Actually, it was even before then it was just really established, but in particular at that point it was like, okay, definitely not a queer story here at all.
Yeah.
God.
I tested a theory just now, by the way, because I was thinking about, we were talking about the comments down the bottom, and then I was thinking, well, it was a webcomic, and I thought maybe it's the alt text, and that's what it is.
It's the alt text of the image.
Right.
Yeah.
And that actually makes sense. So the little lines that were down the bottom of the page are the alt text from the webcomic images. You know, when you hover over the image and it has alt text.
Oh, right.
That kind of makes me want to
go and read the webcomic.
Yeah, read the webcomic version, because in the second one the notes aren't down the bottom anymore. So, but I'm just like, I pulled up a random page from the second one, and if you mouse over it, it does have the alt text.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that although it would be interesting to check whether or not the second version had it. Maybe they stopped doing it at that point on the online version. Found the book. Oh my God.
They did it on the online version, but they didn't do it in the print version.
So not the book.
It's on the online version. This alt text is there, but the print version, the alt text isn't there.
Oh well, I'll definitely want to read the online one.
Yeah, I've got it now. I'm like, now I want to read the online one.
So the book that I was thinking of that this related to, that I was making close connections to, is called Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee.
Yeah, that's a great series.
Yeah. Well, I like the first one. I didn't like the second one, and I must admit I stopped there. I think the concept was good, and I think she probably continued well after the third one, but the second one was just too much going over the top of what had already happened. But the concept was fantastic, and same sort of thing, teenagers with superpowers in a world where things don't seem quite right, and there was just a lot of overlap.
You see, this wasn't teenagers though. This is new adult. This is about,
I meant that what we were talking about in terms of the concept of them starting out as teenagers doing all of this sort of thing. Because in a lot of respects, that's what's happening in Not Your Sidekick, is that they're teenagers who are wanting to get involved. And in that case, then the adults were already involved. And so they're saying, no, you can't do this. But the kids are pushing to do it. Whereas this is sort of questioning it from another perspective of what if the superheroes were the teenagers, and that's who you wanted to rely on. But I'm actually, the reason I'm most interested in reading the second book is actually got to do with the concept of where that shift happened from. They went to the camp and it was just a couple of kids talking about saving the world. But at that point, it didn't look like the government was planning anything along those lines. In fact, what the government seemed to be planning seemed more nefarious than anything else.
Oh, yeah. It reminded me of X-Men, like the Sentinels and the, people protesting against them and all of that kind of vibe. Yeah. So, I mean, what I know of X-Men is mostly from the TV show from when I was a kid,
Nostalgia, yellow sand.
So, like, I never read the X-Men comics either, so I'm saying that with a caveat. But, like, but that was the vibe I got from it. You know, that whole, like, people know about them, and most people, like, which isn't in, I don't know how many other, like you sort of Superman, Batman kind of, you don't have quite the same vibe of, like, I guess the thing with this one that I thought reminded me of the X-Men as well was, like, there's levels of power too. Like, a lot of the other ones that, you know, your classic superheroes, it's like this one powerful person that's the topic of the comic, and then there's, like, their nemesis or whatever.
Yeah.
But, like, because this is, like, a big group of people, and, like, you've got your really strong powered people, but there's also these people that have these, like, smaller abilities that are kind of useless. And they're the ones that are vulnerable to, like, this community that's decided that they hate them. Which I thought, I
think especially even just the community involvement as well in questioning what's going on very much reminds me of X-Men.
And I did think, like, that was quite realistic, because I'm like, yeah, this would totally happen. If this happened, especially in America, I could totally see all these people protesting and saying get rid of them, and, you know, we're all for human rights and freedom in America until there's a bunch of people that are different to us, in which case we change our minds. So
and blame them for everything that goes wrong in the world.
Yeah, I could totally see that actually happening.
Well, to be fair, we do that here to a great degree as well, but, you know, we won't go there too deep.
Oh no, I won't. Yeah, that is true. I guess it's more the I think Australians are probably more let shit happen because we're too lazy to do anything about it, whereas America's like that. We're going to have a bunch of people protesting in the streets and get really passionate about this thing, whereas we're just like, no, I don't know. I feel
we're not as loud about it.
Here. Yeah, we're not as loud about it.
People
doesn't necessarily mean that bad things don't happen, but I think it's more bad things happen because people are like, yeah, but that's not our business. We're just gonna, you know, leave that alone. Well, don't get involved. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's the
agree.
vibe I get.
I agree. I feel like we just don't have quite the same level of mob mentality that Americans seem to get.
And maybe it's just because we have a lower population. I don't know. But there's definitely a differences in how
we definitely have
to things.
What I would call less passion in general.
Yeah, she'll be right. That's the kind of Aussie, like.
What is the thing? Oh, I had one friend, this is not new information, I'm sure everybody knows this, but one of my American friends was just, like, horrified how we don't laugh out loud at movies in cinema.
Or clap or cheer.
All of
Matt
that.
was just talking to me about this, like, what, a week ago? Because he showed me a clip from, was it Avengers?
It was Endgame.
And, like, and all the cinema was, like, cheering and people yelling stuff out and jumping. And I'm like, this is weird.
Shush! Everybody shush!
Yes. I know, like, actually I was getting anxiety watching it because I'm like, I couldn't handle this. This would make me crazy because, like, people are talking on the screen and you can't hear it because they're cheering and stuff. And I'm like, well, this is not, I can't handle this. but like, there would obviously be a group of people that would be like, gee, it's so boring going to the movies when nobody is involved. You know, like, I can kind of see how, like, having that audience.
Well, apparently it's particularly a problem at live performances when Americans come here. Because I went to see, when Night Vale was here, I went and saw Night Vale perform live. You could see, because I don't know if we were the first show or if we were the only show, but whatever it was, you could see with the band, who obviously had never performed in Australia before, how they were a bit confused that we were all just sitting there politely listening.
Do they not like it?
Are you having a good time?
I did also. I went to see a concert given by Postmodern Jukebox when they came to Australia, and while they were more experienced, I did get a bit of a sense of the same. Like, they used to much more audience participation.
I'm like, don't make me say stuff. Like,
I'll sit back, thanks. Relax.
You know, when they're like, we can't hear you. Say, how are you doing? And I'm like,
Yeah, don't do that. You should
You-
probably just say to every American place every American group that comes out here, just imagine a room full of introverts. They love you. They're just not going to show it.
That's
They're
They're
it.
not
all
just going to
inside
voice their love.
deeply impassioned. Just look at their shirts. They love you. I promise.
Yeah.
It depends. I think it depends on the audience. Like we went and saw Foo Fighters, and Dave Grohl's like a real showman. Like he gets out there and is like interacting with the crowd and getting them going. And we were all like yelling at the tops of our voices and stuff. So that
That
kind
was
of
in a stadium.
that's in
though,
a
so
stadium. It's a different feel. It's not an intimate little thing.
But
But you know,
also,
like it's
he's actively encouraging you, like in a really
not just
bombastic way.
passively waiting for you to respond. Like
Exactly right, like
Yeah.
and expecting that will be there, and
Mm.
'cause- and I yeah. Anyway,
On a related topic,
yeah,
getting back to the story,
that's where I was trying to do.
thank you.
let's talk about Patrick.
Oh
Yes.
yes.
Yes, Patrick. I didn't feel like there was enough on him in this book to really get a good sense of whether I liked him or not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still undecided.
I think he has told you exactly why he's there. Yep. He said if you don't need to actually be able to control people with your mind, because if you can read their mind, you know exactly what you need to do in order to get them to do the thing that you want. And I think that's exactly why he's there.
Yep.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep, it would explain what looked like shady business when they were off on the trip.
Hmm.
And was it just me, or was there a panel at the end where it looked like he was with some other chick?
Oh, I don't remind
I
myself
do
now.
vaguely recall something along those lines.
It was see, the problem is the last bit was quite long because it went through lots of backstory, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
don't remember exactly when it was. Oh, here it was. It was the first page of of chapter 4. The 5th panel, bottom left corner.
Okay, hang on.
I'm not 100% sure, but it certainly looks that way.
Chapter 4.
Chapter
Buster-
4.
Buster the Superdog.
Yep, first page after the coloured page. Panel 5, bottom left corner. In the background.
I didn't even pick up that was.
Matt, are you telling me you weren't paying attention to the art when you were reading this comic?
That's fine.
I think I've already mentioned the art doesn't do it for me, so it wasn't the thing I was paying attention to much.
Oh, sorry. I had to after so many times of you saying this to us.
Is it him though?
That's
That's what I'm asking.
it's hard to tell.
It's suggestive of him at the very least.
He's got a similar haircut, I guess.
Yeah. But the thing is that, like, I know when comic artists draw, sometimes they get very similar shapes for particular body types, and they don't necessarily always realize that they've drawn something that looks very similar to somebody else.
Mm.
Because it's a background character, like, if it's not him, it's a background character that means nothing.
Yeah.
Which makes me question, well, why are they there then? That's a really weird shot. Considering everything else is so
space. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, why that? Why? Like, it just seems to me. I don't know. Are we supposed to see her pining for something? What's the point of that panel then? Otherwise, every other panel there is very muchly supposed to communicate something because it's about her. Every panel without text in this section is about communicating what she's been up to, right?
I'm trying to read the name of the book she's got in that.
Madness and Civilization. Yeah.
Right, I think it's time to message the creators and say,
What's this?
This panel here.
I feel like the second book will probably answer this question anyway. So
yeah, I don't trust Patrick. I don't think he's given up his evil mastermind ways.
yes.
I think there's still something a little bit dodgy.
I mean, he's studying law. Come on.
Yeah.
Sorry to all the lawyers out there. I know you're lovely people.
Well,
at least half of you.
It's one of those things though that feels like it's a double blind in that like
could be.
very little, if any, of this story do we see not from her perspective, right? It's pretty much the story told from her perspective. Why did we get to see that scene where he was off with somebody else? Very clearly not something she was aware of under those circumstances. It's meant to make us suspicious, right? But that then makes it feel like a double blind, like it's supposed to make us suspicious so that we don't trust him.
It makes us suspicious, but yeah, should we not be suspicious or should we go with it and be suspicious? Yeah, and I know that looking at that thing is like, do they want me to be suspicious or do they just, yeah.
I don't think they're too wedded to like it being her perspective. Because if you remember back to the storyline with her teacher, we do get to see like his final moments with his husband, which like there was no way that she'd ever know that or, you know.
But, yeah, I suppose. I don't disagree that there were definitely other bits. I just felt like they tied in more directly with the story, whereas this one was just like she's clueless. At least with the bits with the teacher and his husband, she did find out about that something happened. Like it was linked to her knowledge, even if it wasn't something she would know the details on. This one was not linked to her knowledge.
I feel like both instances are kind of about foreshadowing.
Okay.
So like you're right that the first instance links to knowledge that she has, but it's foreshadowing for us that this comes through. And I feel like it's the same for Patrick. They're foreshadowing that things are not what they seem. But on the other hand, or that she may have reason to distrust him so that we buy into it when she does.
I definitely think that regardless of what he's actually intending, I don't think he's necessarily doing it in the way she would approve. At the very least.
Absolutely,
at the very least, he might have good intentions of what he's trying to achieve, but his methodology is unlikely to, I think, given his history, his methodology is unlikely to be appropriate. I don't know what the words we use there, but you know what I mean.
I did like the way that he, the relationship he had with his allies, henchmen.
Oh, he's henchmen, yeah.
I thought that was really nicely done in some respects.
But in some respects, I felt like that tied into why he gave up being a villain right at that time. Like, she turns up. Suddenly he reads her mind, and suddenly he's no longer going to do his villainary things.
So this is why it's really interesting when we read one book and we haven't all read the second one.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I think it's like, you know, sometimes we read the whole series and it's like you kind of just like stuck with what you're talking about because you're like, yeah, I liked it or I didn't like it. Whereas when we're partway through a series, there's all this speculation. This last
that's one of my favorite parts. That's one of my favorite parts of things, watching TV shows and reading series, is to speculate what's going to happen next.
Yeah. That's why it's not good to be too far ahead of anybody else, though, because when you know, and that's why I asked if anybody else had gone on to number 2, because I was like, well, I don't want to leave someone alone if they've read number 2, but by the same token, I think I want to talk about this now where I'm at, not push through to read it right now.
I've had to stop myself from doing it because I'm really bad. Like, especially because I tend to read things. Sorry, Kim.
Sorry. I'm glad I stopped myself because I'm like, oh, my loan's gonna expire before I manage to read the second one because I borrowed them before we announced this. And I've been extending my loan, so I was near the extension of my end of the extension of my loans, and it's like, oh, you've got till the end of May, and I'm like, oh yeah, May, and I'm like, no, April. I'm like, and then they're now like, you've got to the end of May. I'm like, yay!
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ours was like, you've got your books until the government says we can open up
Yeah,
again.
basically.
Yep.
Yeah, mine did the same as Kim's. They did it to the end of May, and then they extended it to the end of April, and then they extended it to the end of May. So, but yeah, I feel like, generally speaking, I'm good about not giving things away, but I end up sitting there with a big grin on my face because I know the answer, and I think,
Yes. Yeah.
That's me too. And also,
Just wait,
I
just
get mixed up if I read them back to back because I'm like, where did that one
I
end
do
and the
that
other
as
one
well.
begin?
Yeah.
That's when I inadvertently spoil things. It's like, did this thing happen? And then I second guess myself about stuff that did happen in the first book, but then I'm afraid to mention it because I can't remember if it was in the first book.
yeah,
And I'm like, well, did this thing happen? And how do you ask if a thing happened without giving away what the thing is? I don't know. I've had to just stop myself. Like I did it. I was very proud of myself with Skyward because I'd read that a year ago and I really wanted to read the second one when it came out. And I held off because I was like, no,
held strong.
I won't be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to shut my mouth. Just wait until after the hangout.
Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm just scrolling through the pages, and I've just realised how inconsistent the length of the chapters are.
I was just looking at the archive on the website and the same thing. Like, oh, that one's got like
First one's 22 pages. The second
pages.
one's 50. The third one's 78.
Wow,
And then the
that's
fourth
really
one's
inconsistent.
52.
And then the fifth one is 167.
Whoa.
Oh yeah, and then it goes 145,
Oh my gosh.
and then 112. So that's not too bad.
What's
And
is
then
the
page
last
14.
book? So I
And the
can
last
last
that's
one's got
it.
14 pages.
Yeah.
Epilogue.
So it's
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, what did you guys think of the sister, whose name I cannot remember? I'm so sorry, sister, who feels.
Didn't get to
Oh, hang on.
explore very much of that
No,
because it was
didn't
kind
get
of
to
pretty
know
much right at
every-
the end.
I thought it was fairly typical, actually. Like
Jen.
Jen, that's right.
Jen, yes. Sorry, Jen. Yes, in a lot of respects, there was more exploration of the father and mother than there was with Jen.
Mm.
yeah. I think maybe that's coming. Like I think we were kind of just
Just
Getting
getting
into
started.
that. Yeah.
Mm. I hope somebody can stop her from feeling like she has to save the world at some point. Like, seriously.
yeah.
It was a nice interaction overall, I think.
Oh, I loved her with the parents. Like, I thought
I
the
mean,
parents
between
were
the
very-
sisters,
Oh, the sisters. Sorry.
I did kind of like that. Because I mean, naturally there'd be some issues, and again, like that's kind of a theme that comes up in the Umbrella Academy, for example.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought of the Umbrella Academy until you mentioned it, but now that you've mentioned it, there are a lot of parallels that I hadn't. Yeah, I mean, we only watched. How much did we watch? Did we watch?
We watched the first season, which is all
Yeah.
that's out.
Is that all there is? Yeah,
So
I haven't
far.
read any comics or anything, but I don't know if I will continue with it either because it's dark.
Yeah,
It's so dark.
I
It
didn't
is
finish watching the
very
first
dark.
season, but it was in my mind because when I picked up the strong female protagonist on Comixology, it was like one of the ones that was up there, and I was like, yeah. So as I was reading, that was in my mind as well.
Yeah. And this is what I mean. Like, I feel like if I'd read this story when it had come out, like I said, I feel like it would have been a bit more revolutionary in my brain. Unfortunately, either these other stories have riffed off it, or it riffed off them all. I don't know what happened. But
I mean, the Umbrella Academy comic probably predated this one, but the TV adaptation would have come after.
Yeah.
the TV, yeah, that's true.
But sometimes people do come up with similar ideas at the same time.
Look, and I mean,
as well.
I don't know. I feel like they've just taken the concept a little bit further in this, in that she feels like they've not just questioned, being a superhero and, villains versus superheroes and what is the real difference between them and stuff. But, like, how do you save the world? Like, that to me is a massive theme in this of how do we actually save the world? And I'm like, you can't?
Well, that was kind of an interesting
that's what
thing that they did in the the scene with Cleaver in the cell, they kind of do both of those things at once. Talking about what is the difference between heroes and villains, and does it come down to just like the people who are supposed to look after you did, or they looked after me, but you weren't looked after, so you became bad because of all, nature versus nurture kind of thing. And then
bit deterministic.
Yeah. And she's like saying, and like he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, saving the world. And it's like, what's the idea? And it's like, it's perfect for everyone all the time. And he's like, that's insane. But it's like, that's what, that's what saving the world, in air quotes, is meant to be.
Yeah.
And it
And
does show
is it
that,
even realistic?
I think it's realistic that if you get these powers as a teenager, that you're going to get messed up because you've got this, huge thing that happens at such a pivotal point in your life that it'd be really hard for them to see it from a balanced perspective and not feel like I have to save the whole world, instead of just like, I need to just do my best to be a good person. And it's like this, especially with is it Feral, like this whole just like this guilt and this, I need to do this thing for everyone else because everyone else is more important than me, and I have this ability, so I must use it in this way. And it's like, well, why can't you just live your life and be kind to people and be a good person? And is that not enough? And if everybody did that, then the world would be a better place. But it's like,
it's a hard thing though. Like I could put myself in that situation and go, I could have prevented that particular thing from happening. Like it's hard not to say, like, if I was out and about and this, bus full of kids crashed and they all died, if I happened to be there, I could have stopped it from happening,
Yeah.
And I feel like Hector's a really good example of how he pulls out the comics and says, this is our guidebook of how we do what we do. Now. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, naturally, if you came from our world and suddenly had powers, that's what you would use as your guidebook. Oh, God damn it, I cannot find it.
What are you trying to find?
There's another book that I read, which is from the, what's the publishing group you mentioned earlier, Elizabeth?
Book Smugglers.
Yeah, Book Smugglers, which was another sort of story along these lines, where it was actually a hero and a villain in training.
Oh, I loved that one. What was it called? That was one of my favourite reads of that year.
Yeah, it was a really, really good one, but I can't find it.
Training together?
No. So they both essentially apprenticed into their roles, and the one who's training to be a hero keeps getting kidnapped because he's working with the hero, but he's essentially the sidekick. So he keeps getting kidnapped by the bad dude, and that's how he meets one of his underlings, and hence they end up knowing each other in real life and end up in dating each other.
I think I've heard of this book.
It was great.
It was so good. It wasn't long.
No, it was a shorter.
But exactly that. It shows exactly what you're talking about, Kirsten, in terms of your background, like idea of possibly being a way that it influences where you end up. Because in this case, it was just like, well, what kind of job do you end up doing? Oh my God, this is killing me. It's got to be here somewhere. I'm now wandering through my Kindle list for the third time.
I will have a look through my...
Did you mark it as read on Goodreads?
Goodreads.
Yeah, I would have.
It's several years ago, and that's going to be so many more books to go through.
And if you can't remember the author's name or title...
I can't at all. I cannot at all. All I can see is the cover, but I don't know, I can't see it here. I'm scrolling so much more carefully now.
Sure
Here it is. Superior.
That's it.
That needs a reread.
It was a great story.
Oh, it was a really, really good one, that one. I also want to know what the author's name, and I can't read it from the title cover page. It's half covered up. What were they thinking when they did this? Jessica Lack. But yeah, like the sheer number of just stories we've mentioned that was of this sort of storyline is why I was like, It wasn't that it
Yeah, I
was
think I've
bad.
just lacked in my reading of these kinds of stories. And you said like The Incredibles before. I have not seen The Incredibles.
What?
I have not. It's like one of the very few things I haven't seen that
Oh,
everybody else has watched in the way of
this is,
animation.
it's not to scold you so much as just my shopping.
It's just like, how did I miss that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Believe me, I've been meaning to watch it like many, many times.
Yeah, because like I mean I enjoy it and thoroughly love it, especially the exploration of the idea of family when you're in a superhero situation. I like that as that particular angle of it. So I feel like each one of them does in some way explore the ideas in a slightly different way, which I think is really good. Like the whole cookie cutter superhero idea from Tansy is fabulous because the whole idea is that you get chosen for it, but you don't just have the powers. The machine gives you the powers. And you replace somebody else who's already on the team, so that person gets retired, and then you get put onto the team. Hence the cookie cutter part of it all. And
but you don't know, you don't know what your powers are or who, if you're going to replace someone. So whether you're going to be like the next Superman or like
whether you're going to be like the original, yeah,
it's great.
Yeah,
or they're going to end up as Aquaman.
Yeah.
Oh, and the main character of the first story. Not necessarily, it's not first in terms of timeline, I think, if I remember correctly, but it's the first story she wrote, is actually disabled.
Oh.
So, yeah, going into that circumstances and becoming a superhero is, and she shows up later and I love her so much. I just love her.
It's a great series. They're all short stories, novellas type things, so definitely recommended.
Oh, and she reads them in her podcast. So if you want to listen to them, you can just listen to them from her podcast.
Just as a little side note, Daniel Radcliffe is reading Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone from his couch at the moment.
I saw that.
Oh, right this second.
I haven't actually watched it, but I did see.
So do we want to talk about anything else from the book?
I think that's a no.
I think that's a no. Well, do we want to read the second one, guys, and have a hangout for it? That's the...
I might look through the second one online, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how long it will take me.
Yeah, not gonna bother.
Maybe ask. Maybe
after I've read
the
it,
people who didn't get to come to this one.
Yeah, because that's the other thing I was thinking. There was people who have read it but didn't
interested.
make it tonight.
Yes.
They might want to come to another one.
Because I will read it, so
same.
I'd be
I
interested
probably
in the
will
second
too.
if other people are interested.
If there was a hangout, I would probably read the second one. That's the only reason I would, I think.
I think don't necessarily put your hand up to say let's have a hangout.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opposite. I'll probably read it, and then whether it's worth having a hangout or not will be whether we've got anything more to add. Having read the second lot, is there anything else to talk about?
Yeah, I feel like the ending is going to have to be something like, given the setup for what she's trying to accomplish, I feel like the ending is going to have to be something impressive. Or it's going to fall down on its face and
well, the very last one in the
not.
archive, like I haven't looked at it, but it says break hiatus.
Yeah, I saw that too. So I don't know whether hiatus means
so I don't know if it
really
ever officially ends. There may be like a wrap up, but may not be an official.
Right. So now I'm going to wait for somebody else to finish it before I because I am not reading on if it's a series. I can't deal with the darkness. I feel like I'm almost, but not quite, in a Neil Gaiman story. And
just never, ever, ever. I'm sure we've already told you, Mel, not to watch The Boys. Never, ever watch that, Mel.
I feel like that's been watched, but I don't. I feel like it's been mentioned, but I don't even know what it is.
It's a series on Prime based on superheroes.
Oh, okay.
And it's just
I won't.
Yeah,
I won't. I think my problem also comes from, like, when I'm saying that I sort of feel like this idea has been done, I also feel like I'm over superheroes in general. Thank you, Marvel Universe. So, because even they started asking questions like this, right? Like, that was the whole point of Civil War in a lot of respects, but that was more oversight. But it doesn't matter. It's still questioning the morality of superheroes and their way they operate and stuff and stories and blah, 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 blah. I don't disagree with the questions. It's just a lot that I've taken in the last few years over those ideas. I want to go back to Tansy's world. It's a lot lighter.
It is delightful.
Yeah.
I was just actually thinking, because I have recently been reading the Watch series by Sergei Lukyanenko, and that was published back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, translated from Russian, and it's about like it's like the light and the dark magicians who have like a Cold War going on in Russia. And there is a lot of sitting around philosophizing about morality and the nature of good and evil and that sort of thing. And I was just reminded of that now, actually, because I don't think it's quite the same. Like, this does less of the direct discussion about morality and that sort of thing, although there is a little bit, but I still feel they have a little bit in common.
There's a lot of stories out there that have overlaps, but in different ways. A lot of it is not doing it exactly the same way. A lot of it is doing it from totally different angles, and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of thought around the idea in general going into it. And hell, I encountered it when I was watching Anzac Girls the other weekend. There's that scene at I think it's in the last episode, where the German soldiers, she discovers the German soldiers have been kept somewhere and haven't been given any care or water or anything, and they're all injured and stuff.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And the German soldier basically, like, because she'd said at the very beginning how we're on the side of good and God is with us and everything, and then at the end he's like, God is with us and all of that, and it's like, yep. All right. Well, I think that was a terrible spot to end on. Terrible. Somebody say something else.
Don't worry, I missed half of it because my internet decided to cut out for a little bit.
Oh.
And I was like, I'm trying to remember that because it was a while since I watched that show, and I read the book for it too, but like that was ages ago. But yeah, I actually do, when you say that, Mel, it does stick in my mind to that bit, because it does make you think about, and about war and how stupid war is, and people are just people. And
it was like going back to high school and rereading All Quiet on the Western Front all over again. Oh God, stop talking about World War One, Melanie.
Well, do you do it often?
At Anzac Day, I had to have this debate with my mother about Anzac Day versus Remembrance Day. There's been a lot.
Kind of curious about the debate now.
We are not discussing it in a recorded hangout.
I was going to say, shall we finish the hangout first?
Yeah.
First.
Okay, regardless of anything else, we're wrapping it up. Any last things that people want to mention? If you don't know, we ramble.
It's kind of
we still have to add going off topic to the shirts.
Yeah.
Is it going off topic since 2013?
We need to find a way to print them so that you can do both sides. Okay. All right. I apologize for finishing up with World War One, guys. I know that was deeply not connected enough to make it worthwhile, but too bad, so sad, we're here.
Maybe it's connected in book 2. We don't know.
Well, anyway, the point is that I'm sorry for a very bad finishing off point, but we didn't have anything else to say, so that's it. So anybody who's watching this at home, thank you for bearing with us in our moaning ramblings, and we appreciate you watching us. Leave a comment for us below. How pro was that?
Hit the like button, subscribe.
All those people that are watching.
Yeah, several hours of video. Anyway, all right, anybody watching, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.